Nothing about you is accidental, not the way certain ideas cling to your mind, not the strange comfort you feel in silence, not the moments when life feels oddly familiar, as if you've stepped into a scene you've already lived. Most people are told their story begins at birth. A blank page, a clean slate. But what if that's not true? What if who you are now is not a beginning, but a continuation? This thought has followed humanity for thousands of years, across cultures that never met, languages that never touched, and civilizations separated by oceans and centuries. Different names, different symbols, the same quiet suspicion that life doesn't start here, and it doesn't end here either. This isn't about blind belief. It's about patterns, because patterns don't lie. Some people arrive in the world carrying a weight they can't explain, a sense of depth that doesn't match their age, a calm that feels earned rather than learned. Others feel a persistent pull toward places, ideas, or emotions they've never encountered, yet somehow recognize. Philosophy begins when explanation fails, and explanation fails often. Think about how uneven life feels, why some people seem to move through existence with an unspoken understanding, while others struggle endlessly with the same lessons, why certain fears appear without cause, why some connections feel instant, ancient, undeniable. If memory defines identity, then forgetting defines rebirth. Ancient traditions propose that forgetting is not a flaw, it's a mercy. To remember everything would crush the present under the weight of the past. Pain, loss, guilt, unfinished stories. The mind would never rest, so instead memory fragments. Not as clear images, but as sensations, a feeling, a reaction, a pull. You don't remember the event, you remember the echo, and echoes are powerful. Have you ever walked into a place you'd never visited and felt an inexplicable sense of belonging? Not excitement, not novelty, but recognition, as if your body arrived before your mind could question it. Logic struggles here, but philosophy leans in, because familiarity without experience breaks the rules we're taught to trust. And when rules break repeatedly, we don't ignore it. We investigate. This is where the idea of continuity enters, not reincarnation as fantasy, but as psychological residue. The mind forgets. The soul remembers differently. Modern science calls many of these experiences anomalies, déjà vu, intuition, emotional memory, pattern recognition, useful labels but not answers. Labels describe, they don't explain. Déjà vu, for example, is often dismissed as a neurological glitch, a timing error, the brain misfiring, but that explanation collapses under intensity, because mild familiarity is one thing, total certainty is another. Some people don't just feel they've been somewhere before, they know it. They anticipate turns, reactions, outcomes. Their body responds emotionally before reason catches up, fear, longing, calm. Emotion precedes thought, and emotion is older than language. Philosophers have long argued that knowledge doesn't only come from learning, but from remembering. Plato himself suggested that truth is not acquired, but recalled. If that's true, then learning is excavation, and some people dig deeper without knowing why. Consider human connection. Most relationships are gradual, built slowly, tested over time. But then there are the others, the ones that bypass logic. You meet someone and the connection is immediate. No effort, no performance. Conversation flows as if resumed, not started. Silence feels safe instead of awkward. These encounters don't feel new. They feel inevitable. Psychology might call it compatibility, chemistry, projection. But those words feel thin when placed next to the experience itself, because the feeling isn't excitement, it's recognition. as if two paths that separated long ago have crossed again, not by chance, but by continuation. And this doesn't only apply to people, it applies to skills. Have you ever noticed how some abilities emerge without training? A natural grasp of music, art, language, leadership, or understanding human behavior. Not just talent, but fluency, as if the hands already know what to do before instruction arrives. We call this giftedness, but philosophy asks a quieter question. Gifted from where? Experience accumulates. That is undeniable. The mind builds through repetition. The body learns through exposure. So when ability appears without exposure, something doesn't add up, unless exposure happened elsewhere. This doesn't mean everyone lived as a poet or warrior or philosopher in another life. It means experience doesn't always vanish. It transforms. Skill becomes instinct. Wisdom becomes temperament. Pain becomes caution, which brings us to fear. Some fears have no story, no trauma, no origin, no memory attached. Yet they exist, deeply embedded, automatic, unreasonable. Fear of water without drowning. Fear of confinement without imprisonment. Fear of heights without falling. The body reacts before the mind can argue. Philosophy recognizes this as pre-rational knowledge. The body remembers what the mind denies. If memory were only stored in the brain, this wouldn't happen. But memory may not belong exclusively to the brain. It may belong to experience itself. And experience, once lived deeply enough, leaves marks that transcend form. Session 1 is not about proof, it's about permission. Permission to question the idea that you are only what you remember. Permission to suspect that your depth didn't come from nowhere. Permission to consider that your restlessness, your wisdom, your quiet distance from the noise may not be flaws. They may be residues. In the next session, we'll explore the signs that appear when the soul has traveled long paths, patterns that repeat, fascinations that don't fade, and the unmistakable feeling of being older than your years. But for now, sit with this thought. If life were truly a blank slate, why does so much of it feel unfinished? There is a moment in life when patterns become impossible to ignore, not because they suddenly appear, but because you finally stop running from them. The same type of relationship, the same emotional conflict, the same internal struggle wearing different faces, different people, different places, same outcome. Most people call this bad luck. Philosophy calls it recurrence. When something repeats often enough, it is no longer random. It is instructional. And this is where the idea of continuity becomes uncomfortable, because it places responsibility back into your hands. If life were only a single chapter, repetition would be cruel, meaningless, unfair. But if life is a continuation, repetition becomes deliberate. Lessons do not disappear when ignored. They return, refined. Each time they ask the same question in a different tone. Have you noticed how certain emotional themes follow you? Abandonment, control, rejection, the need to prove yourself, the fear of being seen. You may swear you've changed, and in many ways you have. But the core challenge remains, because growth doesn't come from changing circumstances. It comes from changing perception. Ancient philosophy teaches that the soul evolves through confrontation, not avoidance, not comfort. What is unresolved seeks resolution, and when resolution is delayed, it echoes across time. This is why some people feel an unexplainable familiarity with certain eras or cultures, not as a hobby, not as curiosity, as longing, a quiet homesickness for a time they cannot name. They are drawn to ancient architecture, forgotten rituals, old languages, distant wars, lost civilizations. The attraction isn't intellectual, It's emotional. Something in them recognizes the rhythm. The symbols feel personal. The stories feel intimate, as if the soul leans forward while the mind struggles to explain why. Psychology might say this is imagination, but imagination does not explain grief. Some people feel sadness for things they never lost in this life. They mourn places they never visited. They ache for meanings modern life doesn't offer. This is not romanticism, it is displacement. Like arriving late to a world that no longer speaks your language. These individuals often feel like observers rather than participants. They move through society without fully belonging to it, not because they are superior, but because they are out of sync. They see through illusions too quickly. Status feels hollow. Noise feels exhausting. Small talk feels foreign. And from early on, they sense it. A feeling of being older than their body. Tired in a way sleep can't fix. Calm in ways youth shouldn't allow. This is where the phrase old soul comes from, not as poetry, but as recognition. An old soul isn't someone who knows everything. It's someone who knows what doesn't matter. They've already chased it. They've already lost it. They've already learned the cost. So instead, they move slowly, speak carefully, observe deeply. They carry patience that wasn't taught, and melancholy that wasn't earned here. This often isolates them, because society rewards speed, ambition, hunger, not depth, not restraint, not reflection. Old souls are frequently misunderstood, labeled distant, cold, unmotivated, but inside there is constant movement, a search not for success but for meaning, which leads to another pattern. The recurring search for something more. No matter what is achieved, it never feels complete. Goals are reached, but satisfaction fades quickly. The next question appears. Is this all? This restlessness isn't ingratitude. It's memory. The soul remembers expansion. It remembers purpose beyond routine. And when the present feels too small to contain that memory, dissatisfaction emerges. This dissatisfaction often pushes people toward philosophy, spirituality, or inner exploration, not because they are lost, but because they are remembering. They sense continuity. They feel that this life is a chapter, not the book. And chapters have arcs, which brings us to sensitivity. Some people feel everything, not dramatically, but deeply. Crowded spaces drain them. Emotional tension affects them physically. They absorb moods without invitation. This isn't weakness, it's permeability. The more experience the soul carries, the more open it becomes, like skin worn thin by time, not fragile, but exposed. These individuals often become listeners, healers, anchors. People are drawn to them without knowing why. They feel understood in their presence, but the cost is heavy, because without boundaries, sensitivity turns into exhaustion. Carrying emotions that aren't yours creates confusion, fatigue, emotional fog. This is why solitude becomes necessary, not as escape, but as restoration. Silence isn't emptiness for these souls, it's oxygen. They don't withdraw because they dislike people. They withdraw because they feel people too much. And if life is a continuation, then sensitivity makes sense. Each lifetime refines perception, sharpens empathy, softens ego, until the soul can no longer pretend not to feel. By now, you may notice something important. None of these signs are glamorous. They are quiet, heavy, often inconvenient. They don't make life easier, they make it deeper. And depth is rarely rewarded. But depth is where meaning lives. In the final session, we'll bring everything together. How awareness breaks cycles, why remembering isn't about the past, and what happens when you stop running from the feeling that your life didn't start here. before we continue, if this kind of content resonates with you, if these ideas feel uncomfortably familiar, subscribe, not for answers, but for better questions. There comes a moment when the search changes, not because you found what you were looking for, but because you realize you were never meant to find it. You were meant to remember. Most people spend their lives trying to become someone, chasing identities, collecting labels, building stories they hope will finally make them feel whole. But for some, the discomfort never fades, even when things go right. Even when life looks successful, there's still a quiet knowing beneath it all. This isn't the beginning of me. And once that thought takes root, everything shifts. Because the purpose of remembering isn't nostalgia. It isn't about escaping the present. It isn't about glorifying the past. Remembering is about ending cycles. Patterns repeat only when they remain unconscious. As long as you believe your struggles are random, you're trapped inside them. As long as you believe your reactions are just who you are, they control you. As long as you believe your pain began here, it will follow you everywhere. Awareness changes this, not instantly, not dramatically, but permanently. When you start seeing your life as part of a longer arc, suffering loses its cruelty. It gains context. Pain becomes information. Fear becomes a signal. Repetition becomes instruction. You stop asking, "Why does this keep happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" This question alone breaks loops, because lessons cannot survive recognition. Once a pattern is fully seen, felt, understood, integrated, it has no reason to return. This is why remembering isn't about recovering details. You don't need images, you don't need names, you don't need stories, you need insight. The insight that your reactions didn't appear randomly, that your sensitivities aren't defects, that your restlessness isn't failure. They are signals from experience, accumulated, refined, carried forward. And here's the paradox. The more you remember, the less you cling to identity. You stop defining yourself by trauma. You stop defining yourself by success. You stop defining yourself by roles, because identity is temporary. Awareness is not. This is why people who reach this stage often feel detached from social games, from status competition, from shallow conflict. They've already played these games. They know how they end. So instead, their attention turns inward, not in selfishness, but in clarity. They become selective, with time, with energy, with people, not because they feel superior, but because they finally understand cost. Every interaction has a cost. Every attachment has a weight. Every unconscious choice has consequences. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. This is when life begins to simplify, not externally, but internally. You still face challenges, you still experience loss, you still feel fear, but you no longer drown in it because you're no longer confused about why it's happening. You recognize the pattern, and recognition is power. At this stage, something subtle happens. The search for something more dissolves. Not because you found it out there, but because you realize it was never out there to begin with. What you were seeking was coherence, alignment, the feeling that your inner world and outer life are no longer at war. And that alignment comes from integration, from accepting that your depth is real, that your memory is layered, that your life has momentum. You stop resisting the feeling of being different. You stop apologizing for needing solitude, for valuing silence, for seeing through things quickly. You stop forcing yourself into spaces that drain you. You stop explaining yourself. And when you stop explaining yourself, something extraordinary happens. You become calm, not passive, not numb, calm, a grounded stillness that doesn't need validation. This calm is often mistaken for indifference, but it's not. It's understanding. You understand that not everyone is meant to walk with you, that not every lesson is gentle, that not every connection is permanent. And that's okay, because permanence was never the goal. Growth was. This is the quiet truth behind continuity. Life doesn't repeat to punish you. It repeats to complete you. And when completion begins, urgency fades. You stop rushing to prove anything. You stop chasing recognition. You stop fearing missing out. Because you've already lived enough to know nothing essential is missed. Everything essential returns. So if this entire journey, these 3 sessions, felt less like information and more like recognition, if parts of it felt uncomfortably familiar, if you didn't feel convinced but seen, then here's the final question. Not for philosophy, not for belief, for you. Which part of this felt like it was already inside you, waiting to be named? Leave your answer in the comments, not for me. For the part of you that's been remembering quietly all along.